Scott Wright, draftcountdown.com, joins us with a look back to the weekend. So are you working on next year's draft now, or are you still rehashing this year's draft? How's that work for you?
Well, I'm working on reviews this week for each team, but I am already counting down to the 2017 NFL Draft. It's less than a year away. I believe 360 days away, to be exact.
Well, God bless you with that. Round one, obviously Thursday, we looked back to. Round two, on Friday night, the Eagles did not have a pick. They went with a couple of offensive linemen here. They go with one in the third round, and then they took another one in the fifth round. And, of course, Wendell Smallwood kind of packaged in there. So a little bit on the offensive talent that the Eagles ended up with between rounds 3 and 5.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the key guy is Sayamala, because they just had a desperate need on the interior of the O-line. They made some roster moves last offseason that did not work out and really created an issue on the interior. So Sayamala is a player who could play guard or center. Gives you a lot of versatility on the interior, and I think that was right about where he was expected to come off the board. So that was a good pick. And then Vaitai was a good value. There was talk that he could be selected as early as the third round. And that's a program down at TCU that has sent a handful of blockers to the league after the past few years. He's 6'6", 320 pounds, really long arms, kind of a physical specimen. So I think he can provide depth out there at right tackle. And then later in the draft, too, they had a couple of late-round picks that I liked. The one in particular, just quickly, is Jalen Mills, the defensive back from LSU, who I actually had a top 2-round grade on. I had him at number 63 overall, and the Eagles got him at 233. And there are some potential health and character concerns there that could have one or the other or both contributed to him sliding. But he's exactly the type of big, rangy defensive back, athletic defensive back that you're looking for in today's NFL. So I think that could end up being a steal.
Give us a little insight, too, on Smallwood, because a lot of people, West Virginia led the Big 12 in rushing. And you look at that West Virginia offense, and it's kind of a spread type of offense, but he's kind of a between-the-tackles runner, but he seems like a guy who could do a lot of work at the NFL level.
Yeah, absolutely. He's not overly big. He's only about 5'10", a little over 200 pounds, but I think he runs bigger. He'll pound it between the tackles a little bit, and he's probably going to end up being more of a change of pace type in the NFL, that situational third down running back. But he's one of those guys that if he gets an opportunity, you never know, because we've seen so many times over the years, people doubted Maurice Jones-Drew. Oh, he's small to be an every down back. LaShawn McCoy, there's all these guys, and they get their opportunity. So with the running back position, it's as much about opportunity as it is talent. But Smallwood, he was expected to be a mid-round pick. That was right the range he was going to expect to come off the board. So value-wise, it was a good pick, and he'll provide some youth and depth in that backfield.
You saw, obviously, the quarterbacks, after the top quarterbacks that we saw. Let's start with the fit for Hackenberg with the Jets. Well,
and it's a good fit for him in that it's a big media market. It's a lot of publicity, a lot of opportunity, and there's a path for him to the starting job. Unlike, for example, Connor Cook, who not only slid in the draft all the way to day 3, but then went to Oakland, where for the foreseeable future, barring an injury to Derek Carr, he's not going to get off the bench. Christian Hackenberg's going to be able to play, and that might be both a blessing and a curse for Hackenberg, because the expectations might be a little unrealistic in the beginning. You kind of have to rebuild him from the ground up, and there's going to be a lot of pressure and a huge spotlight on him there in New York, and it'll be interesting to see how they develop him. And another guy who landed in a good situation, too, is Cardale Jones from Ohio State, a player I'm a fan of. He landed in Buffalo, so there's a path for him to that starting job maybe in the next year or two as well. So and it's going to be interesting to see how both of those guys develop, because I think both Hackenberg and Jones have top 10 overall type upside despite all their risks.
Yeah, you got Jones going 139 to the Bills, as you mentioned, Scott. And then, you saw Dak Prescott. The Cowboys finally took a quarterback for the first time since 2009. Now, they have Romo, obviously, but is he a guy that you think can start in this league down the road?
Yeah, I think so. He's got the physical tools, a little on the shorter side, just a shade over 6'2", but he's got really thickly built. He's a terrific athlete. He's got strong arms. Physically, he checks all the boxes. He just needs polish, and he's a year away. And I think the concern here is the Cowboys kind of needed a better option as a backup quarterback now. not 3 years from now. So I think that's a little bit of a concern. But no, Prescott's definitely a nice long-term developmental signal caller. But I think Dallas would have preferred to get somebody who was maybe a little bit further along. And there was talk that they were trying to trade back into the first round for Paxton Lynch. They'd been trying to trade up for Connor Cook, I believe. So, they were looking for a different type of option. But if they have to settle on Prescott, that's not a bad fit.
Connor Cook ends up going to the Raiders, and obviously they have Carr out there, so it appears that they view him as a backup.
Yeah, and you can never have enough good quarterbacks. And Reggie McKenzie comes from that Green Bay Packers lineage, and look at all the quarterbacks that Ron Wolf used to draft over the years. Even though they had Brett Favre, they still kept drafting quarterbacks because even if you can't use them, they're a valuable asset, whether it be Hasselbeck they traded, Aaron Brooks they traded, can go on and on, Mark Brunell. So I think he probably took a page out of that book. And there were others that were trying to trade up for Connor Cook. So he's already an asset. And I just mentioned about how tough it was of a situation for him, not only free falling, but landing where he did. But to a certain degree, it's partly his own doing because he had a chance to go to the Senior Bowl and press scouts and answer any questions they might have had. And he bypassed it, whereas look at the guys who went ahead of him. Jacoby Brissett went ahead of him, and Carson Wentz would not have been the number 2 overall pick in the draft if he was not at the Senior Bowl. So we saw with A.J. McCarron, too, even going back to Brady Quinn. I wish if you're healthy, go compete because you have a lot more to lose or you have a lot more to gain than you have to lose.
What do you think of Cody Kessler going to Cleveland? They've kind of said that he has a shot out there. I mean, do you like him as a prospect?
Well, just about anybody would have a shot in Cleveland at this point because they don't have a quarterback, and that's the problem. So by default, he's going to have a shot. But honestly, that was one of my least favorite picks in the draft. I had him as a late-round pick. I think he profiles as maybe he can be a backup. So maybe the Browns got their long-term backup quarterback, but I think it's pretty clear based on what they did. This draft was more about just restocking the shelves, setting a base going forward. I think the way they drafted, I think it's pretty clear that they understand this is going to be a multi-year project, and they're going to be picking at the top of the draft again next year, and they're going to be back in the market for a quarterback. So I'm not a big fan of what they did simply because they didn't get their quarterback, and ultimately that's all that matters. They made 13 picks or whatever the final number was, but until you have a quarterback, none of those other guys are going to matter. So I think this is more about a culture draft for the Cleveland Browns where they wanted to bring in their types of players and kind of start rebuilding that culture, and then they'll eventually bring in their franchise quarterback down the line when they're better prepared to develop him and help him succeed.
Yeah, now you look back at, let's start with the Philadelphia-Cleveland trade. Did you like what Cleveland did after the trade?
Well, I said from the beginning that I was going to wait and to evaluate that trade for the Cleveland Browns until I see which quarterback they end up with. And I suppose you could say the jury's still out because they're going to have extra first-round pick next year as well, so they could use that to try to get their quarterback. But as it stands now, I don't like it for them because they could have had Carson Wentz. I think Carson Wentz would have been a perfect fit in Cleveland. I think he's exactly what they needed. And then not only did they pass on Wentz by trading down, they passed on Paxton Lynch at number 8, and then they passed on him again at number 15. I always say the golden rule of the NFL draft is unless you have a franchise quarterback, you don't pass on one. And I think the Browns passed on a potential franchise quarterback at least 3 times. So I'm not a fan. And to me, they're just this is just year one of rebuilding, but they're not going to start moving forward until they get that quarterback. So you have to put a pin in it for at least one more year, I believe.
Kevin Hogan ended up going to Kansas City in the 5th round. A lot of people liked him. Do you see him as the heir apparent to Alex Smith out there?
Yeah, he could be. And similar to Kessler, I kind of view Hogan as more of a career backup. I gave Hogan a slightly higher grade because I think he's a little bit more physically talented. And unlike Kessler, he didn't take a step backward as a senior. But it's not like Alex Smith is this Peyton Manning, Brett Favre level, Aaron Rodgers type of guy. So I've always thought the Chiefs could do better at that position, but I don't foresee Hogan challenging anytime in the near future. And I think best case you're looking at him long term as a backup. And he's the type of player who's gonna be wearing a cap on the sidelines for probably a decade because of outstanding intangibles, and he'll probably start some games. It gets an opportunity due to injury or whatever the situation might be, but not the type of player I don't think that you look at and say, okay, he's gonna take us to Super Bowl.
I guess taking a kicker in the 2nd round has to be discussed. If you Florida State and can kick, you can get drafted pretty high. Seems to be the more of this story. But what would you say to the Buccaneers drafting a kicker at 59?
I'd say nice job, and they traded up to do it, but they had some big issues at that position last year to the point where it cost them games. And Aguayo was a legitimate top 100 pick. I thought he'd go in the third round more so than the second, but we've known for not just the year, we've known for 2 years that he was going to be a top 100 pick as a specialist. He's one of the specialist prospects to come out in a while, and I think he might have gone in the top 3 rounds a year ago had he come out when he was eligible. So not a real surprise, and I really like what the Buccaneers did. Their first pick with Vernon Hargreaves, the third, the cornerback from Florida. The only thing he's lacking is that the prototypical height, length, but he's a heck of a football player and addressed a big need for them. And the pick I really liked was getting Noah Spence, the defense from Eastern Kentucky in round 2, who I think might be the best pure pass rusher in this draft. I think he's a great fit for them. And the Buccaneers the past couple of years have just taken huge steps forward in their rebuilding process with the way they drafted. And I could get into, too, some of their late-round picks were intriguing as well. The Buccaneers, I think they probably finished in the top third of the league in terms of how well they drafted, in my opinion.
Yeah, and on Friday's show, Scott, you had said, what if the Jacksonville Jaguars end up with Miles Jack and Jalen Ramsey? That is happening. So that had to be one of the better one of the best picks of the weekend, getting those two guys now paired together.
Well, and they get an A+. I don't even care what they did beyond those first two. And they did all right after that, too. But you get the second and third best players in the entire draft, you get an A+. It's just incredible that they ended up with both Ramsey and Jack. And not only are those guys just special talents, they address needs, all of that for the Jaguars, great fits, but they're the difference makers that the Jaguars needed on defense. That's what they were lacking. They had a lot of good players on defense. They didn't have any game changers, and now they were able to add 2 of them. So, boy, I don't know if there's a more exciting young team in the league than the Jacksonville Jaguars. They are really loading up, not only on offense but on defense as well. And I tell you what, if of all the 32 teams, you could say who you want to watch play tomorrow, I'd almost say I want to watch the Jacksonville Jaguars. I'm a fan of this young talent and the draft, so that probably sways my opinion a little bit. But, boy, I mean, getting Ramsey and Jack, that's almost unprecedented. I don't know if since I've been doing this, a team has ever got 2 of the top 3 players in the draft.
We're talking with Scott Wright, draftcountdown.com. So many interesting stories. Jalen Smith going to Dallas. Now, they've indicated they think there's a chance he could play. Did you like where they ended up going with Smith?
Well, and the thing to keep in mind, too, is the Cowboys team doctor is who performed the surgery on Jalen Smith's knee. So nobody is going to have a better understanding of his prognosis and long-term outlook than the Cowboys. And the fact that they made such an investment at number 34 overall, I think speaks to their confidence that he's going to be able to regain his form. And even if he doesn't play in 2016, if you think he's going to be 90% of what he used to be in 2017, that's a top 10 overall pick in the draft. So I think the fact that the Cowboys were the team that took a risk on him really bodes well for his future. And you feel good for the kid. It was kind of the best-case scenario for him after everything that had happened. Not only did he collect a nice chunk of change from his insurance policy tax-free, but he'll also get a pretty decent-sized contract from the Cowboys. Landed with a great organization where they obviously have a lot of faith in him. And all things considered, it worked out pretty well for Jalen Smith, even though he didn't wind up being the top 5, top 10 overall pick after that knee injury. Still landing in a good spot.
Who had the worst weekend for you? A guy that you really liked that maybe fell, who ended up having a bad weekend with everything that happened?
Well, just teams or specific players or both?
Yeah, both.
I've already mentioned. Yeah, well, I mentioned Connor Cook just as a player perspective. I think he was one of the big losers of this draft. I mentioned the Cleveland Browns. I think not coming out of this draft with a quarterback, I think you're still spinning your wheels. I really don't like what they did. The Atlanta Falcons are another team, and I always struggle with bad classes because I find the silver lining in just about everyone. I could list 20 that I liked, and I have a hard time coming up with 3 that I don't. But I think the Atlanta Falcons, you want to find that balance between value and talent and need. And I think maybe the Falcons skewed a little bit too far towards the need end of the spectrum. So I question a little bit what they did. But overall, like I say, I'm an optimist, so I find the positive in just about every draft. But Atlanta was one that kind of stood out. But Cleveland's the big loser to me just because they had all those picks and they got some good players, but they still don't have a quarterback, and that's the only thing that matters for them.
Yeah, and the fact – I want to go back real fast to the kicker question. The new kicking rules in the NFL, will we see teams, you don't even see teams draft kickers all that much, let alone second or third round. But will the new rules start to make teams focus on that a little more, do you think?
I think so, in Aguayo's case especially, because it's not like Aguayo. He's got a very strong leg. He can hit from beyond 50 and all that, but it's not like he's going to be setting the NFL records on a routine basis for longest field goals. But the thing that's intriguing about him is he's automatic close. He makes all the kicks he's supposed to make. From 40 in, he's money. And that's important because those extra points aren't necessarily gimmies anymore. So I think that probably helped or increased his value to a certain degree as well. So, he was a legitimate top 100 pick. I know it's rare. We don't see a kicker or punter go in the top 3 rounds, and when we do, it's sometimes a reach, but it wasn't a reach in this case.
Yeah, we're talking with Scott Wright, draftcountdown.com. Yeah, I was thinking about that when I saw the kick. I'm thinking, these extra points, because that was a problem for teams last year. What was it, the AFC Championship game? There was an extra point that really it came down to in that particular game that ended up being a difference maker for New England in that loss. Let me get your thoughts on the Giants, what they did after the first round. We talked about Eli Apple the other day, and, some people thought that was a little bit of a surprising pick. But after that, they went with wide receiver, Sterling Shepard from Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. Then they go Darian Thompson. So what did you think of what the Giants ended up doing in the later rounds?
Well, and Shepard, that he wasn't a reach by any stretch. He was going to be a day 2 pick. I just wasn't as big of a fan of him as some, just because he profiles as more of a slot receiver, and I want to draft those guys on day 3. If I'm drafting somebody on day 1 or even day 2, personally, I want somebody who profiles as the prototype at that position, who's number 1 or number 2 receiver, what have you. But there's definitely an area they needed to upgrade, and he was the proper value there. The pick of the Giants that I really liked was Darian Thompson, the safety from Boise State, in the 3rd round. At one point, I thought he was going to be a first-round pick, and he slid a little bit because he didn't run as well as you would have hoped, either at the scouting combine or his pro day, but just a really good all-around player, and beyond the physical tools, the intangibles. He's going to get everybody lined up, and I just think he's a rock-solid player for them to put back there with Landon Collins, who they drafted last year, and really finish shoring up that secondary. So I like that pick. And then a little later on, Paul Perkins, the running back from UCLA, I think he could make some waves in that backfield. It's not like they have a standout there right now. And then even Jarrell Adams, a tight end from South Carolina in round 6, he could have gotten the top 100 overall, and he has that type of talent. And there's another situation where it's not like they have a dynamic game breaker at that position, so there could be some opportunity for a guy like Adams to come in and surprise.
I thought, by the way, I thought Washington in the NFC East had the best Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Who did you think, Dallas, New York, Philadelphia, Washington, had the best 3 days?
Boy, that's Washington did well, but I'm inclined to go with Dallas because I think what they made clear is they're trying to win a Super Bowl now. And when you look at what their options were at number 4, even though philosophically I personally wouldn't take a running back that early, if you're going to do it, you'll do it with Ezekiel Elliott. I mean, he's a stud prospect at that position, and he's going to come in and he's going to be an impact guy for them right out the gate. He's going to take pressure off of Romo in that passing attack. He's going to put up a ton of impressive performances behind that dominant big offensive line in Dallas. And I think it's very easy to make the argument that he's the guy who helps them win a championship most in the next 2 to 3 years. And then they got that wild card in Jalen Smith. And if Elliott and Smith hit, who cares what happened the rest of the way? And they got some good up players as well. But their first two picks, they're almost like the Jacksonville Jaguars, where they got 2 top 10 picks.
Talk with Scott Wright, draftcountdown.com. Austin Johnson went 2nd round to Tennessee. What'd you think of the fit for him going to the Titans? I know he was one of your top players on the board entering round 2.
Yep, absolutely. He went 43 overall, which is right about the range. And we talked, too, about how I think in a lot of years he's a late first-round pick. It was just this was such a deep defensive tackle class. I think we saw a lot of the defensive tackles slide a little bit because teams realized they were going to be able to get a good one a little bit later on. But Austin Johnson, I think he landed in a good situation there. That's an exciting young team in Tennessee. They had their quarterback, Marcus Mariota, and all these draft picks from that trade, not only this year but next. And now it's just filling in the pieces around Mariota. This is exactly what you want to do. You get the quarterback, and then you fill in around him. So I think the Titans are going to be really interesting and a force to be reckoned with the next 2 or 3 years. And their other pick that I'm intrigued by is Derrick Henry, the running back from Alabama, because even though they traded for DeMarco Murray, there were some pretty clear signs of decline with him last year. And of all the prospects in this draft, I don't know if there's a single one I'm more excited to see on the field than Henry, just because he's such a different specimen at that position. I just not exactly sure how he's going to translate. I could see it being a colossal disappointment, or I could see him being just an absolute stud. I just don't know that we've seen anything like him, at least not in a long time. So Henry was a really intriguing pick for the Titans.
All right, you grade me on how I do here. Hala, Pala, Vatai, Vaitai. How's that?
Close enough for me.
That's got to be the name of the draft, right?
Absolutely. Well, we had some good ones, too. And last year we had Owamabe Adigizua. I always do that. I put a pronunciation guide up on the site for some of these tough names. But that was a good pick for the Eagles, too. Sayamalo is going to be the guard, and Vaitai is going to provide the depth on the outside. And he could have very easily gotten in the top 100.
Good stuff. Scott Wright, draftcountdown.com. If you have an overview of this year's draft and the draft class that you would kind of put a period at the end of all our conversations, Scott, what was your take overall on this draft?
It's a passing league. It's not a good time to be a big and a run-focused type of player. I think we saw Reggie Ragland, Jaron Reed, and I think there's lots of cases of good football players who slid just because they maybe have some athletic limitations and their ability to hold up against the passes in question. So I think that's a trend we're going to see going forward.
Yep, and the 2017 draft is coming up. Let me quickly, quarterbacks next year. If you wanted a quarterback, was this the year to grab one? What's next year's quarterback class? Because that's really been a lot of the discussion about the Eagles. John Clayton on with us last week said, look, they know that the next 2 years, that the quarterbacks are not there. That's why they felt they had to make a move now to get one, because they, the thought process really, Scott, that quarterbacks are going to have to start sitting because the college offenses are not translating to the pros. So this was your time to get one.
Yeah, I think the Eagles did the right thing. Not only do I think Wentz is better than any prospect that I see for next year at this point, maybe Deshaun Watson from Clemson, and I haven't taken an in-depth look, especially those quarterbacks. You really got to dig into them and do all the groundwork for those quarterbacks. But I don't really see anybody that would be in Wentz's class. And for the Eagles, this was the time to do it because not only was there a better player available this year, I think, but they were in striking range. If they were picking at 20, they might not be able to do it next year. So the fact that they were first in the middle of the first round, then they got into the top 10, they were close enough that they could make the move up and get it done. And we saw that last year, too. There were some teams that wanted to move up, but they were just too far down. It would be too expensive. So I think the Eagles did the right thing. And now not only do they got their quarterback of the future in the fold, they're already working with them and developing them, whereas they would have just been kind of spinning their wheels for a whole other year if they were waiting until next year's draft. And there's no guarantee they would have gotten anybody better next year, even in a best-case scenario.
All right, Scott Wright, draftcountdown.com, at draftcountdown on Twitter. I feel like I've lost a friend for a while.
I'll come back anytime.
Take care, pal. Enjoyed it as always.